The vendors who sold copal pellets were the busiest. Everybody wanted to buy incense to conduct a ceremony of apology in their homes. The market breathed hatred, but after a few days, it regained its tranquility. To calm the mood, Cortés had authorized the feast of Toxcat, the biggest annual celebration of the Mexica people in honor of their god Huitzilopochtli. The market immediately took in a long breath of air and relaxed. The preparations for the feast began. Amaranth, which was used to make the edible sculptures of the god, filled the air, as did the hummingbird feathers which were used to decorate them. Huitzilopochtli, the sun god of the Mexicas, had been born of a feather placed in the womb of the lady Coatlicue, his mother, and because of this he was represented with the most beautiful feathers. Malinali too was excited by the feast. It was the first time that she would experience it. What most attracted her was that Cortés had forbidden human sacrifices during the celebration, so there would not be any spectacle of blood. She had heard that it was an impressive ceremony in which all the nobles and great warriors participated. They performed the dance of the serpent before the great temple as an invocation to the spirit of Coatlicue, mother of Huitzilopochtli. After many hours, the dancers entered a sort of trance, an exaltation of the spirit, through which they put themselves in communion with the generating forces of life. And so the dance took place on two planes, on the earth and in the sky. The serpent danced and flew. Malinali felt it a privilege to watch the celebration. She liked being in the great Tenochtitlan, to be a part of it. Sometimes when returning from the market, she couldn't help but think how different her fate might have been if instead of giving her away to the merchants of Xicalango, they had pledged her to the services of Montezuma. She would have loved to have been one of his cooks, to have had the privilege to prepare one of the 300 courses that were cooked in the palace day after day, to seduce him with her culinary skills, so that instead of tasting each dish and casting it aside so that his underlings could be fed, he would feel obliged to eat it all, captivated by the mingling of flavors. It would also have been interesting to have been one of the artisans who created jewels for him, who toyed with metals, who melted gold and silver into anklets, bracelets, earrings, and nose rings. Though as she mulled it over, she thought that the feather arts would have been, aside from a great honor, her favorite activity, to fashion the capes and crests that the great lord would wear when presiding over ceremonies in the great temple, to make feathers, those shadows of the gods, into suns that would outshine the very sun, the Lord Huitzilopochtli. Malinali then decided to sew feathers on one of her huipiles for the occasion. She went to the spot where they sold precious feathers, and she noticed a group of people milling around a man. He was one of the many runners who came from the coast, bringing fresh seafood for Montezuma. Screaming, he told everyone that ships had arrived with more Spaniards who came in search of Cortés. So Malinali learned before Cortés of the arrival of Pánfilo de Narváez. Pánfilo arrived at a bad time. The political situation was delicate, complicated, but Cortés had no other choice but to cut him off and detain him, before he himself was arrested and hanged, accused of treason for having disobeyed the orders of Diego Velázquez, who had sent him on a mission of exploration, not of conquest. Before leaving to do battle with Narváez, Cortés left Pedro de Alvarado in charge of the city. When Cortés told Malinali that they had to leave the city to go fight Pánfilo de Narváez, she was very upset. Many times in her life, she had had to abandon what she most cared for and loved, forced again to start from nothing, to create a new world, abandoning all to gain all. But on reaching Tenochtitlan, she had thought her pilgrimage had ended, that finally she could spread her roots, just like that, calmly, without noise or commotion, in peace. She did not count on things becoming complicated in unimaginable ways. Cortés left Tenochtitlan, headed for Zempoalan, where Narvaez had established camp. On arriving there, he found out that Narvaez was taking cover in the great temple of that city. Since Cortés knew the place well, he decided to attack at night, when he was least expected. A tropical storm appeared to change his plans, but in fact the opposite occurred. He decided to attack like the rain, unexpected and untimely. He sent 80 men into the great temple and left the rest of his army, Malinali, the horses, and provisions on the outskirts of Zempoalan. For Malinali, it was a tempestuous night, by all accounts. That day she had begun to menstruate. The horses sensed it and were restless. She had to move far away from them and the men to wash her blood-stained clothes so that the horses would not become anxious. Malinali thought that it was more likely that the moon and not the sun fed on blood, the blood of menstruating women, because she had noticed that each time that she menstruated, the moon was full, and so she discovered the lunar cycle was exactly the same as the menstruating cycle. The light of the moon spread the blood in her intimate spaces, the light of the moon, the light that would shine over victory or tragedy that night, abundance or defeat, ecstasy or death. The silver light that controlled the seas, that brought to life all the liquids in the body so that they could sing a bloody hymn to the beginning of new life. To regenerate her, this was only one that could become her ally. She offered her blood to the moon so that this night she would be with Cortés, despite the fact that she was hidden behind gray clouds. Malinali did not want to think about what would happen to her if he was defeated, and so it seemed that the moon had listened to her and received her offer, had contemplated the ecstasy of her liquids and responded favorably. That May night, Cortés caught Narvaez by surprise and defeated him soundly, even though his combined forces were less than 300 men against the 800 commanded by Narvaez, the majority of whom, after the battle, allied themselves with Cortés, amazed by the stories that they heard about Tenochtitlan, where there was gold for everyone. But Cortés did not have time to celebrate his victory, for he received news that there was a Mexica uprising in Tenochtitlan in response to a massacre conducted by Pedro de Alvarado in the Great Temple.
This ends Disc 4. Malinche, Disc 5.
After that night, and for many nights later, Malinali could not sleep. She was tormented by the images of a massacre that she had not seen. Ever since she was a girl, she had developed a technique for falling asleep, which consisted of closing her eyes and painting a codex in her mind. When faces, figures, glyphs, signs began to appear in her mind, she knew that she was already in the land of dreams, in the fantastic universe that belonged to her alone. That place was where she came upon her most luminous thoughts, but also her most horrifying ones. After listening to the story of what had happened in Tenochtitlan in her absence, Images came into her head as soon as she shut her eyes. Heads, legs, arms, noses, and ears flying through the air. Although she had not witnessed the killings in the great temple, she had Cholula as a precedent. So with utmost clarity, her mind reproduced the sound of flesh tearing, the screaming, the weeping, the explosion of harquebuses, the sound of bells on the ankles of fleeing people trying to scale the walls. Malinali felt a shuddering in the center of her body, and she opened her eyes. This would happen various times until, exhausted, she would be conquered by sleep. Then came the worst part. A repeating dream imprisoned her mind. At the beginning of the nightmare, Malinali was a butterfly held aloft by the wind, who observed the dancing Mexican nobles and warriors from high above. She saw how they gave themselves to the dance, concentrating, entering a state of religious exaltation. From the center of the circle in which they danced, a pillar of light rose and united the sky with the earth and cast a powerful yellow light over the dancers, who were adorned in their finest costumes, their finest feathers, their finest hides. But suddenly, a shower of bullets fell over them, piercing their chests, and their bleeding hearts turned into stone and rose to the heavens. In her nightmare, Malinali spoke. Hearts of stone can also fly. On saying this, a fascinating and terrifying image captured her attention. The stone carving of the mutilated body of the goddess Coyoshauqui, who was sister to the god Huitzilopochtli, and who had died torn to pieces when she tried to prevent the birth of her brother from the womb of his mother, Coatlicue, came to life. She abandoned her stillness to bring together her mutilated parts. The fragments of the legs and the arms that had been separated reunited with the torso, and the stone turned to flesh, and the sculpture became a living thing. When stone turns to flesh, the heart turns to stone. As if Malinali had called them, some of the hearts of stone approached her face and burst into 1,000 pieces, spitting streams of blood. Others fell like hail and pummeled Montezuma, burying him. Malinali's butterfly wings were bathed in blood and became heavy. Unable to fly, she fell noisily to the ground. Malinali, having then turned into one of the dancers, tried to flee from the shotguns and the shower of stone hearts, stepping over the dismembered to scale the walls. But the blood dripping from the stones made that impossible. Her feet and hands slipped and made her fall. At that moment, she wanted to scream, to plead to heaven for help, but no voice came from her throat. Turning her face, she saw a rain of stone hearts fall on Montezuma until he was buried under them. And then a rain of swords was directed at Malinali's chest, piercing her heart in countless spots, from which beautiful bloody feathers emerged. At this point, Malinali opened her eyes, out of breath and full of tears.